MMA fans love to see fights finished. The quality of a card is often judged based on how many fights wrap up inside the distance, and many will applaud major bouts ending in a matter of seconds. Still, there is a clearly defined line there. While a clean knockout or submission is a very nice thing, there have been many stoppages over the years that, for one reason or another, have made aficionados squirm in their seats. Coming off a few weeks of UFC action that have been chock full of dramatic comebacks and one-punch knockouts, it's worth taking a look back on some of the finishes that sent fans home unnerved. Here are the top 10 scariest finishes in UFC history. Number 10. Frank Shamrock vs. Igor Zinoviev, UFC 16. With Ken Shamrock in the WWF and Royce Gracie on hiatus, the UFC needed a new face for the promotion. Frank Shamrock, brother of Ken, was the man picked for the job, and his coronation came at UFC 16. Pitted against an overmatched Igor Zinoviev, his mission was to deliver a finish worthy of the occasion, and boy, did he deliver. After a couple of exchanges, Shamrock got hold of Zinoviev, lifted him, and planted him into the mat for a flash slam knockout. The potency of the move was obvious from the moment of impact. Zinoviev has slammed awkwardly onto his collarbone area, with Shamrock adding an extra bit of oomph to what already would have been a brutal spill. The challenger went completely stiff as soon as he landed and needed to be stretchered out of the octagon. Number 9. Matt Brown vs. Pete Sell, UFC 96, 2009. According to the official record, Brown won via TKO at 1:32 of the first round. In reality, however, he won at about 0:20 of the first round when he drilled Sell with two knees to the face that put him out on his feet. Unfortunately, out on his feet is rarely recognized by referees, and what ensued was a solid minute of an uncontested beatdown. Brown pounded Sell from one end of the cage to the other, doing nothing more than surviving. Sell eventually collapsed, but even then, the stoppage didn't come until after Brown landed a few more punches. The final stat line of the fight read 44 total strikes landed by Brown to Sell 0 per fight metric. It was an ugly mugging that simply shouldn't have happened. And tragically, it's not nearly the worst incident of this kind in the wider world of MMA. Number 8. Gabriel Gonzaga vs. Mirko Cro Cop, UFC 70. In professional wrestling, competitors are defined by their moves, and each has a finisher that they consistently rely upon to put an opponent away. MMA is quite different, as most high-end talents can end in several different ways. But it's not uncommon for a fighter to have a signature technique that carries them to victory. In both sports, however, those techniques can be turned against them. In the same way, Seth Rollins received a major ovation for nailing John Cena with the attitude adjustment during their 2015 feud. Gabriel Gonzaga's career hit new heights when he leveled Mirko Cro Cop with a savage head kick in their UFC 70 matchup. While Gonzaga wasn't a showcase opponent for Cro Cop, given his 5-fight winning streak, he was supposed to be a manageable foe for Pride's 2006 Openweight Grand Prix champion. The dynamic shifted, however, when Gonzaga took Cro Cop down and pounded on him for an extended length of time. The favorite was no longer comfortable, and that opened the door for Gonzaga to let go and throw a massive head kick. It landed flush, collapsing the Croat where he stood. Number 7. Robbie Lawler vs. Rory MacDonald, UFC 189. MMA is an entertaining sport, but it's sometimes easy to forget that the competitors pay an exorbitant toll on their bodies every time they step into the cage. Not all the time, though. In some cases, that wear is impossible to overlook, and when the bout ends because one of them simply can't take anymore, well, it's hard not to feel a little guilty for watching. That was the case with Robbie Lawler's title defense opposite Rory MacDonald at UFC 189. For 4 agonizing rounds, the two welterweights punched pieces off one another to the point where they were unrecognizable. The fight wore on until, in the middle of the 5th round, a right cross from Lawler landed hard on MacDonald's nose. The Canadian had absorbed harder shots earlier in the fight and had eaten much worse in previous contests. That was the last punch he could take, though, and MacDonald simply fell back, weary and battered to the point where he couldn't even sit without assistance. While most people's memories of this one are the heated exchanges and downright fiery mid-fight stare-down, the one that lingers most with this writer is the sight of MacDonald squirming on the ground. Number 6. Frank Mir vs. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, UFC 140. It doesn't get much scarier than a bone being broken cleanly in two, and the 2011 interim heavyweight title fight between Frank Mir and Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira saw that happen. The opening minutes of the bout saw Nogueira lighting up Mir with punches at the range, which quickly turned into potentially match-ending strikes in the clinch, then on the ground. Rather than looking to end the fight then and there with strikes, however, Nogueira attempted a guillotine choke, initiating a scramble that ultimately ended with Mir inside control. The former UFC champ immediately grabbed hold of a kimura and kept the arm isolated as Nogueira tried to roll away. The lock became tighter and tighter until Minotoro's arm could get no more contorted. Then it did as Mir gave him a second elbow in the middle of his humerus. The ref immediately identified the break, but it was still far too late. The legendary fighter's limb was broken and needed 16 screws and a plate too. Number 5. Rashad Evans versus Chuck Liddell, UFC 88. Legends die hard in MMA, and few have died harder than Chuck Liddell. Toward the end of his competitive career, it was downright uncomfortable to watch the Iceman fight as he consistently wound up splayed across the mat. The most devastating, most terrifying finish during that stretch was his loss to Rashad Evans. Right from the beginning of the fight, it was clear that Liddell was in for a long night. The younger, quicker Evans found his range early and immediately began landing punches at will. While he still respected Liddell's power, he was a snowball rolling down a hill to the point where a stoppage seemed inevitable. And indeed, it came in the second round as Evans threw a right hook that came from hell itself and straight to Liddell's chin. That one punch left the former champ in a twisted heap, unconscious to the point where the referee needed to roll him to his back and ringside doctors were holding his head off the canvas. It was a sad sight from the former champ and, unfortunately, seemingly ruined his once steely chin. He lost twice more, both by knockout, before calling it a career. Number 4. Dan Henderson versus Michael Bisping, UFC 100. At UFC 100, the Brit was unfortunate enough to eat what was likely the hardest punch of Henderson's entire career in the second round of their Ultimate Fighter Season 9 coaches bout. Bisping was clearly out cold as soon as it landed, but Hendo took it a step further by hammering him with a flying elbow as he lay unconscious on the ground. While the count had rubbed many fans the wrong way over the years, it was impossible not to worry about him struggling for breath on the canvas. Henderson was unfazed, though, an added insult to injury by jeering him over the elbow in the post-fight presser. Had anyone else bragged about an extracurricular shot of that magnitude, it could have gone down as career suicide. For a popular figure like Henderson, though, it was just another chapter in his legacy. Number 3. Edson Barboza versus Terry Etim. That's not the reality, though. The reality is that Barboza's knockout of Terry Etim in 2012 is the single most memorable moment in his career and arguably the single scariest knockout in MMA history. Throughout the fight, Barboza kept Etim at a manageable distance and baited his guard lower and lower with a combination of low kicks and body punches. By the third round, he was conditioned to Barboza's will, which allowed him to do a wheel kick clean to his cheekbone. The way Etim's body reacted to being suddenly turned off was downright eerie, as he stiffened to the point where his arms didn't even touch the mat when he fell backward. While this one could technically also go down as one of the prettiest finishes in MMA history on Barboza's picturesque technique, that landing cements its place on this list. Number 2. Tank Abbott versus Steve Nelmark, UFC 11.5. Barroom brawler Tank Abbott is one of the most iconic fighters in UFC history, for better or worse. He became an overnight hit at UFC 6 with his win over John Machua, but notched the scariest finish of the promotion's golden age at UFC 11.5. After breaking free from a guillotine choke attempt from his opponent, karateka Steve Nelmark, Abbott unleashed one of his signature flurries. Nelmark was visibly wobbled by the exchange, and Abbott continued pouring on the punishment. They clinched up, Abbott landed another right hand, and Nelmark collapsed in a twisted heap. Number 1. Chris Weidman versus Anderson Silva, UFC 168. That was the case at UFC 168, which ended with longtime middleweight champion Anderson Silva screaming on the canvas. After being outworked in the first round of his bout with Chris Weidman, the Spider upped his volume in the second using the tool he had found the most success with: leg kicks. After drilling one hard to Weidman's thigh, Silva began throwing them with confidence. A bit too much confidence. Weidman adjusted, checking Silva's second kick with his shin, and then checking the third with his knee. An agonizing snap rang across the arena on contact, and Silva fell back, clutching his leg. The cameras followed us celebrating Weidman, then turned to Silva, visibly and audibly dealing with some of the worst pain imaginable. Let me know in the comments down below if you enjoyed the video. Make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn on the post notification. Thanks for watching.